Hello, and welcome to We Run Over 50. My name is Ernest, and as you might have guessed, I am a runner over 50. Now, I hope you've come to this video after finding the content of one of our other, more substantive episodes useful, or at the very least interesting. I'd hate to think that this video, where I'm going to talk a lot about myself, is the first of ours that you're watching, because unlike our other videos, it doesn't offer any practical insights for you to apply to your own journey as a runner. But if you're curious to learn more about the why behind this channel or my background in running, like that time I had a 2-hour interview with the founder of ASICS, or that other time when I led the creation of the biggest selling performance running shoe in Nike's history, you're in the right place. I've gone ahead and organized this video into 5 chapters, any of which you can jump to directly using your video player. Including this introduction, the chapters are Kicksology.net, Becoming a Runner, Nike Product and Innovation, and then we end with a brief wrap-up. So let's start with why I started this channel. And really, it was equal parts inspiration and indignation. Starting with the latter, as someone who's worked in and around the footwear industry for a couple of decades, and I'll talk more about that in the next few chapters, I've been lucky enough to have had the opportunity to work with some of the best sports scientists in the world and to have had access to the most up-to-date research on sport performance, including running. Before going any further though, I need to make clear that I'm not a doctor and the content on this channel is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before starting any new fitness program. That's really important. All right, well, what my decades of experience around sport performance has taught me is that running helps us live longer, healthier lives. And healthier here includes mental health. I go into this in much greater detail in a separate video where I bust the biggest myth about running for people over 50, and I'll include a link to that video in the description. But suffice it to say that the differences in lifespan and health span between runners and non-runners are not small. Runners live significantly longer and significantly healthier lives. The research also tells us that it's never too late to start running, and that contrary to what too many people still cling to as conventional wisdom, running is not bad for your joints. In fact, multiple high-quality studies have shown that runners actually experience significantly lower rates of knee and hip osteoarthritis compared to non-runners. And for those 50 and older who already have osteoarthritis, research has shown that running is not associated with structural progression of the disease, and is actually associated with reduced knee pain. And these studies I'm citing are not hot off the presses. As I mentioned a minute ago, some go back decades, but even the more recent ones were, for the most part, published more than 5 years back, and in prestigious peer-reviewed journals. So none of this is being kept secret by some cabal with an axe to grind against quality of life for older adults. And yet I still frequently hear of experts, including physicians, telling people over 50 that they should stop running. In fact, there was a specific post on Threads along these lines that ultimately compelled me to start this channel. A poster named Caitlin Me wrote, and I'm quoting her here, "Finally had a doc say that running isn't good for me, or for anyone. And it's only a matter of time before every runner ends up with overuse injuries. Not exactly the help I was looking for." Now, fortunately, the overwhelming majority of replies to Caitlin Me countered this misinformation and let her know that, as one poster wrote, quote, "That doc is full of shite," unquote. But it's clear that more work needs to be done to get the word out that running isn't bad for your joints, that running does not cause osteoarthritis and can actually reduce knee pain, that it's never too late to start running, and that running as an older adult can significantly extend both your lifespan and health span. Now, if I take a step back, there is an intuitive quality to this myth that running is bad for people over 50. Running does subject our bodies to high loads, up to 3 to 4 times our body weight with each foot strike. So I can understand why this, wear and tear fallacy has been so durable. But as the research continues to show, it's precisely this loading that makes running so beneficial. We as creatures evolved to move, and as many experts like to say, motion is lotion for our joints, keeping them healthy and lubricated. And this applies throughout our lifetimes, not just in our youth. In fact, it's the sedentary lifestyle that's historically been associated with life over 50 that makes us sad, sick, and frail. So my righteous anger towards the myth about running for older adults and my passion for dispelling them covers the indignation part of why I started this channel. But it's not all fire and brimstone. I also want to turn more people over 50 onto the many joys of running. There's the very real runner's high that can leave you feeling like you're on cloud 9 after a long run. The profound sense of satisfaction and accomplishment that comes with achieving new milestones. And the deep connections you'll build within a like-minded community that celebrates you on the good days and supports you on the bad ones. Because as runners, we've all been there. If I can inspire even one person who's been on the fence about running to jump off of it and embrace the simplest and most accessible of sports, I feel like all the effort that's gone into this channel was worthwhile. So in addition to ongoing science-backed reports on the benefits of running for older adults, we're going to bring you content that I hope inspires you someday, runners out there, to make that day today. And for those of you who are already running, we're going to deliver content that helps you as a person over 50 get the most out of your runs, whether your goal is to run a marathon or to just be able to consistently put one foot in front of the other. That will include training tips as well as reviews of running gear, all through the lens of our distinct needs as runners over 50. All right, so that covers why I started We Run Over 50 and what we're all about. That brings us to chapter 2, which I guess you could think of as the start of the who is this guy and why should I believe anything he's saying chapters. As I mentioned earlier, I've worked in and around the footwear industry for over 2 decades, with most of that time focused on running. I'll take you through the highlights of the things I've done over that span in these next few chapters, with a focus on experiences most relevant to this channel. To start with, for as long as I can remember, I've had an inexplicable fascination with athletic shoes. I wasn't particularly sporty as a kid, but growing up, I just loved sneakers, and particularly basketball sneakers. And it was through this love for the shoes that I eventually developed a love for the sport of basketball. And spoiler alert here, this kind of backwards pattern is something you're going to see repeat a couple of times. Well, this interlaced interest in basketball and basketball shoes persisted into my adulthood, and eventually led me to create a website called Kicksology.net. This was way back in 2000, pretty much at the peak of the dot-com bubble. Bill Clinton was in his second term as president, and Apple's candy-colored iMacs had been released just a year prior, which may help orient you as to how long ago this was. Though I grew up in New York, I was in Chicago at this point. I had been working as a web designer for some years and had just co-founded a boutique web design agency called 37 Signals. In hindsight, it probably wasn't very sensible to start Kicksology while still working to get 37 Signals off the ground, but necessity was the mother of invention here. You see, I was interested in a particular basketball shoe from Nike called the Air Flightposite. It was as different from other basketball shoes as the iMac was from other computers, and I was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. But it cost an astronomical $160, which translates to a little over $300 in today's money. So, like any sensible person, I sought out reviews for the shoe to see if its performance somehow justified its price. After all, even back then, it seemed like there were websites devoted to reviews of just about everything. Well, to my great surprise and disappointment, I found that performance-based reviews of basketball shoes were all but non-existent circa the year 2000. There were a handful of popular sneaker forums back then, but they were primarily focused on style and cultural currency rather than performance. So, of course, I went ahead and bought those Flightposites regardless. I put them through their paces on the court, and they somehow managed to actually exceed my expectations. And it struck me at that point that there must be other people out there seeking performance-based reviews of basketball shoes, especially as the shoes were becoming so expensive. And so, over the course of a weekend in the summer of 2000, Kicksology.net was born. In all honesty, I had no intention of Kicksology becoming anything more than an excuse for me to buy more basketball shoes. But before long, the site became shockingly popular. So much so that I was seeing more visitors per month than Nike, Adidas, or Reebok's official basketball sites. Now, this is the part of the movie where the protagonist's inner demons derail their success.
But when their lie was exposed, everything fell apart.
Well, my story isn't quite that dramatic, but I did reach a turning point, and it came in 2003. I had been burning the candle at both ends for too long. 4 years of trying to keep pace with the growth of Kicksology.net as a one-man show, while also co-managing 37 Signals through the collapse of the dot-com bubble, had left me running on empty. We at 37 Signals had survived the dot-com crash without laying off any of our staff, which is something I'll always be proud of. But with the worst of that crisis behind us, I knew it was time for a change, and not a small one. So I sold my stake in 37 Signals to my partner Jason Fried, and I decided to wind down Kicksology.net, and my wife and I moved from Chicago to a small town in Oregon called Corvallis, home to Oregon State University. Now, I did shutter Kicksology, but I didn't stop writing about shoes. A guy named Steve Mulholland had just started a publication called Soul Collector that was focused on the burgeoning sneaker community. He brought me on board to lead their shoe reviews and to design their website. Building on my Kicksology.net days, I started with reviews of basketball shoes. And you could see some of my early spreads for the print version of Soul Collector here. It was offered as both a glossy print magazine and a website. Now, it was at this point in 2004 that I discovered running. And again, my passion for the sport was sparked by my passion for a shoe. Like a lot of people, I had attempted to take up running on more than one occasion. But invariably, within just a handful of runs, I'd get injured. It might be a lingering burning sensation under my feet, or really bad shin splints, or pain and swelling in my knees. These ailments reinforced in my mind that my body just wasn't made for running. But then, in August of 2004, I read an article in the Oregonian, the paper of record in Oregon, about a new, quote-unquote, shoeless shoe from Nike called the Nike Free 5.0. According to company reps cited in the article, a runner in the Nike Free 5.0 would naturally adopt the mechanics of running barefoot on grass. As to why that was a good thing, they claimed that these more natural mechanics would strengthen the small, intrinsic muscles of the foot, which over time would contribute to increased performance and a decreased risk of injury. Well, I thought the idea of asking people to pay good money for a shoe that was supposed to mimic running without a shoe was absolutely bonkers. And I happened to have a platform in Soul Collector to put this new shoeless shoe on blast. So I purchased a pair. This is the OG Nike Free 5.0 I bought back then. And like any responsible journalist, I actually took them out for a run before writing my hit piece about how ridiculous they were. Well, that one run turned into 2, then 3, then runs every other day for a month without pain, and that's when my life changed. For one thing, as much as I already appreciated the influence that footwear could have on sport performance, after all, that's what Kicksology.net was all about, my experience with Nike Free just kind of blew my mind and made me realize that a pair of shoes could fundamentally change the way our entire body moves, well beyond what's happening at foot level. Building on that, Nike Free also taught me that those injuries when I tried running in the past, they weren't because my body was somehow deficient and incapable of running. They were because I was running in shoes that were preventing my body from moving the way it wanted to, the way that I, as a unique individual, was born to run. And on that point, my experience with Nike Free also made me a runner. Basketball took a back seat to 5Ks, 10Ks, and eventually a marathon, albeit a very slow one. And I did finally get around to writing a piece about Nike Free for Soul Collector, though it wasn't the hit piece I'd originally envisioned. Instead, it was an in-depth feature, informed by a trip to Nike's world headquarters in Beaverton, Oregon, where I had the opportunity to interview the team behind the concept. And you're seeing the print spreads from that story here. If memory serves, this was published around late summer of 2005. Now, it turned out that the folks at another brand took notice of me branching out into running and visiting Nike's mothership to get the inside scoop on a new product. Because not long after my piece about Nike Free was published, I received an invitation from ASICS to visit their headquarters in Kobe, Japan. And the reason was to learn all there was to learn about an entirely new pinnacle running shoe from the brand due to launch in spring of 2006. To say that I was excited about this would be the understatement of the century. At that point in my life, I'd never visited Japan, let alone ASICS headquarters. So my answer was an instant yes. And that trip turned out to be more remarkable than I had the capacity to imagine. I rode the Shinkansen for the first time, had Kobe beef for the first time, and it was in Kobe. I used the Japanese bidet toilet for the first time, which was absolutely life-changing, and why my wife and I have them in our home today. It was a non-stop cavalcade of firsts for me. But the most profound part of the trip was meeting the team behind ASICS running shoes. The designers, developers, engineers, and researchers creating the shoes that so many runners around the world relied on. These are spreads from the story that I eventually wrote about this trip. The first shows the bustling Amayoko market, which is actually in Tokyo. In the second, you get a glimpse of one of the bidet toilets that had such a big impact on me. Here in the third, you can see the shoe that brought me out to Japan, the Gel Kinsei, which at the time represented the pinnacle of ASICS know-how in running. And here you can see the team that led the creation of the Gel Kinsei. From left to right, there's Hisanori Fujita, the designer, Shinji Senda, the overall project lead, Kiyomitsu Kurosaki, the developer, Toshikazu Kayano, the designer and namesake of the legendary Kayano running shoe, who provided overall design inspiration. And then at right, you see Dr. Tsuyoshi Nishiwaki, who at the time was manager of ASICS Research and Development Organization. Having the opportunity to meet and interview these people was remarkable. They shared all kinds of behind-the-scenes insights, design sketches, early prototypes, things you'd never have access to anywhere else. But the absolute zenith of this trip was when I had the opportunity to meet Kiichiro Onitsuka, founder of Onitsuka Tiger, which would eventually become ASICS. I was told by the PR team at ASICS that I might have an opportunity for a brief, at most 20-minute interview with Mr. Onitsuka at some point during the trip. And to my great good fortune, that opportunity did materialize. But what was supposed to be a 20-minute session turned into a 2-hour gab fest. Mr. Onitsuka, who was 87 at the time, was incredibly energetic and offered refreshingly forthright answers to my questions. He was also very obviously a shoe dog. He loved product, and you could tell that he was very proud of the new Kinsei. As you can see, he ended up taking tons of photos with us, and even showed us some of his paintings, which lined the walls of the boardroom just down the hall from his office. Before he finally had to go, Mr. Onitsuka signed a copy of his autobiography for me, which you can see here. And this is something I'll treasure to the end of my days. That trip left an indelible impact on me. It also made me realize that I didn't want to just write about shoes. I wanted to create them. In a bit of cosmic kismet, after my story about ASICS and the Gel Kinsei was published in Soul Collector in, I think it was the summer of 2006, I started getting feelers from a few different brands asking if I might be interested in joining their footwear product teams. I got so far down the path with one brand in particular that was based outside of Oregon that I contacted a few folks at Nike that I had become friends with to schedule goodbye lunch, because I assumed that I'd be moving out of state pretty soon. Well, one of those folks, a designer named Jeff Henderson, who had recently moved from Nike's basketball footwear design team to their running footwear design team, said, and I'm paraphrasing him here, hold your horses. Let me talk to some people up here because we need to get you into Nike running. Well, he did just that. And before long, I had an offer to join Nike's global running footwear team as an associate product line manager, which is really just a fancy way of saying junior product line manager. I didn't realize till much later how unusual it was for someone from outside of Nike who had zero experience in the industry to get even a junior product line manager role within the running team. Though it might not always seem like it, as a brand started by a runner and his coach, running really is the heart and soul of Nike. So product line manager roles, and we typically shorten it to PLM, those roles in the running footwear team are high profile and highly sought after. The reason that I, as a complete newbie to footwear product creation, got the role is that the guy who hired me, Phil McCartney, who led the running PLM team at the time, felt that he needed someone on his team who would bring an outsider's perspective. For context, by late 2006, we were in the thick of what's come to be called the second running boom. The first running boom kicked off in the early 70s and was on the whole dominated by, let's be honest, thin white guys wearing singlets and short shorts who discovered the masochistic joys of this new thing called jogging. The second running boom kicked off in the late 90s and was characterized by a broadening of participation. We were seeing far more women running and more people running for more different reasons. Many of these new runners, they weren't trying to set a personal record or qualify for the Boston Marathon. They were running for fitness or the social and well-being benefits, or in many cases to raise money for charities. And interestingly, even though they were logging lots of miles, almost universally, they did not self-identify as runners. In other words, if I had asked a second boom runner, "Are you a runner?" she would have said no, even if she had just run a marathon. And I think this was because in her mind, a quote unquote runner looked like a first boom runner, and that wasn't her. Now, an interesting dynamic at the time was that many of the people who staffed running footwear teams across the industry in this era, remember this was late 2006 going into 2007, came up during or in the culture of that first running boom. So they didn't necessarily get the second boom runner. And I think that in me, Phil saw someone who was innately of the second boom and could bring that new runner's perspective to his team. So after profusely apologizing to that other footwear brand that I very nearly joined, I started at Nike in early 2007. And a good chunk of that first year was devoted to simply learning what exactly a PLM does. Before starting, I assumed that Nike had a very detailed manual or guidebook defining a PLM's responsibilities, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Instead, it was very much a matter of diving into the deep end and either sinking or swimming. Fortunately, the broader running footwear team, meeting my teammates in design, development, and engineering, were incredibly patient and generous with their time and knowledge. And so, after a few bumps, I was able to get into the swing of things. And I think it was late in that first year of 2007, I was a full-fledged PLM, no longer an associate, and was assigned my first big program. And it was somewhat unique in that at the start, it wasn't a shoe, but the opportunity to interrogate an idea. Remember I mentioned that second running boom just a minute ago, and the fact that the people driving that second boom, many of whom were women, were running for different reasons than the generations that preceded them, right? Well, in a nutshell, I was given the opportunity to explore whether or not those different reasons for running also led to different expectations from their running gear, specifically their running footwear. At the time, this second boom runner, because they were running quite a bit, was choosing to run in the technical running footwear of the era. So not shoes like the Air Max 360 or Nike Shox that were still part of Nike's performance running line at the time, but instead options like the Kayano from Asics, the Adrenaline GTS from Brooks, and from Nike, the Pegasus and Structure tracks. They were all born in the 90s, but were spiritual children of the first boom, in that they were created for, and in many cases by, runners who came out of that generation. And that first boom perspective continued to shape the way technical running shoes looked and felt through the 2000s. So was the second boom runner happy with these shoes? She was buying them, but was that because they were the only viable option available to her, or because she actually liked them? If the latter, my job would end there. But if the former, things would get a lot more interesting, because I would then have to understand why she didn't like her current shoes and the role or roles that she wished her running shoes could play in her life. Well, long story short, after conducting focus groups and field research in key markets around the world, it became clear that not only did she not like her existing running shoes, in many cases she hated them. These things she was spending hours in every week. She couldn't wait to get them off her feet as soon as she was done with her runs. Fundamentally, she felt she was being forced to compromise both her aesthetic identity and her performance priorities in order to access the benefits of running that had become so important to her. And out of these insights, my team created an entirely new shoe called the Lunar Glide. It delivered a new look, born of the aesthetic sensibilities of the second boom runner, and also set new benchmarks for performance rooted in her refusal to compromise. In this physical sample, you can see the very different aesthetic of the shoe that was established by Sebastian Mermet, a phenomenal designer who I was incredibly lucky to have been paired with for this program. In terms of the performance, we invented a new midsole platform that came to be called Dynamic Support. And what was unique about it was that it enabled us to deliver a cushioning that previously had only been available in the most premium cushioning-focused shoes. while also delivering a level of support that had previously only been available in the most premium support-focused shoes. So no compromise. Here you can see me talking about the shoe and dynamic support in a PR video produced by Nike. I was in my Buddhist monk phase at this point, as you can see. We actually benchmarked the Lunar Glide against the industry-leading cushioning and support shoes of that era, and we're able to show that we quantifiably outperformed them. So the performance side of this was very real. And fortunately, when the shoe was finally released in July of 2009, runners responded. The first Lunar Glide was Nike's best-selling new shoe that year. And in an earnings call for Nike's first fiscal quarter of 2011, Charlie Denson, then president of Nike brand, disclosed that the Lunar Glide 2 sold more pairs in that first fiscal quarter of 2011 than any other performance shoe in any other quarter in Nike's history. The outsized success of the Lunar Glide led to the creation of an entire collection focused on the second boom runner. One of my favorites from that collection is a shoe called the Lunar Eclipse. It was released in October of 2010 and was positioned above the Lunar Glide in terms of pricing. And the additional budget we had to invest into the shoe enabled us to push the envelope in terms of performance. Just one example, the Lunar Eclipse included what I think is still the most sophisticated sock liner to come standard with a running shoe. This shoe and sock liner were designed by another phenomenal designer named Casey Jarvis. And he did an incredible job sweating the details on components like this structure that cradles the heel. Notice how these fingers deflect to allow the structure to conform to a range of arch profiles so that the wearer gets exactly the level of support they need, not too much or too little. Casey and I would go on to also partner on the rebirth of Nike Free for running. This video is already way longer than I intended it to be, so I'll just give you the very high-level version of this. Long story short, my team worked to reground Nike Free in performance, specifically running performance, and that eventually led to the Nike Free Run, which I think debuted in March or April of 2010. This might seem like a small thing, but I fought hard to change the name of the shoe from Nike Free 5.0 to Nike Free Run. In my conversations with runners, it was abundantly clear that they were mystified by our nomenclature around Nike Free. This told me that if we wanted to get the Nike Free business back on track within running, we had to simplify our naming in a way that would make it clear to runners that our version of Nike Free was for them, because other parts of the company were going to continue to make different versions of Free for different purposes. Well, the Nike Free Run went on to be a big seller and marked the start of a turnaround in the free business within running. And then the Nike Free Run 2, which was created by the same team and launched in early 2010, shifted that turnaround into overdrive. I know I shouldn't pick favorites, but if I had to, I'd say the Free Run 2 is my favorite amongst the programs I led as a PLM. It was rooted in authentic runner insights. Its design was both beautiful and highly functional. It delivered real performance benefits, and it sold like hotcakes. Now, as exciting as this period was, a part of me couldn't help but start feeling an urge to get back into the digital world. The social media revolution basically coincided with my time at Nike, and I found that new behaviors being spawned by what at the time were new platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram deeply fascinating. So at the very end of 2010, I left Nike and joined a Portland-based ad agency called Wieden & Kennedy. Wieden is actually best known for the remarkable work they've done for Nike and Jordan since the early days of the swoosh.
Money's gotta be the shoes. Shoes.
Michael Jordan is CEO Jordan.
I worked on the Coca-Cola and Diet Coke accounts as lead digital strategist. For time, I won't go into this period, but I absolutely loved Wieden and the incredible team I was so lucky to have worked with while I was there. During this foray back into digital, I also spent about a year leading the digital strategy team for an agency based out of Singapore, which was again an incredible experience. But after a total of about 3 years away, I returned to Nike to take on a role within innovation, specifically to lead Nike's innovation work around the concept of natural motion across all sport categories. Here you can see me at a Nike Free launch event in London not long after I returned. I spent about 12 years in this second stint with Nike, most of that in innovation. Here I am at the 2017 launch of the Nike React Hyperdunk and Jordan Superfly in New York. They were the first shoes to feature Nike's then new React foam, and I was there to share the innovation story behind the creation of that foam. It was cool to get back to my original hometown in New York, which I hadn't been back to in ages at that point. And here are shots from an amazing series of events that Nike's brand team pulled together for the launch of React in running. I was lucky enough to lead the innovation and product presentations in Seoul, and those are the images you've been seeing, as well as in Shanghai. And the screen they had at the Shanghai event was incredible. As you can see here, it was both gorgeous and ginormous. And something I didn't realize until this event is that these huge displays put off a ton of heat. Even though it was winter and the venue was cold, I was sweating up there. And it wasn't because I was nervous. Unfortunately, most of the things I worked on over the course of my second act at Nike, I can't actually talk about. But one thing I can highlight is that while leading innovation from within the running footwear category, my group collaborated very closely with teammates from the Nike Sport Research Lab to develop a prototype that was proven to significantly reduce the risk of chronic running-related injuries through just the shoe alone. This work served as the foundation for a product that eventually came to market in 2021 as the Zoom X Invincible Run. I'd love to think that through that shoe and its subsequent incarnations, I contributed to keeping at least some runners on the roads who otherwise would have been injured. And I think the underlying research still has some runway to it, so I'm excited to see where Nike goes with it. That's a not quite so brief recap of my time at the Swoosh. It was made up of 2 stints that spanned a total of 16 years. I had the opportunity to lead some very big running footwear programs across both the commercial and innovation sides of the company. Got to work with some of the smartest, most talented people in the industry, and hopefully along the way contributed to products that inspired and enabled more people to get out and be more active. And that brings us to today. This video that I intended to be a sprint has very much turned into a marathon. But I hope it gives you useful context into the why behind We Run Over 50, along with perspective on where I'm coming from and the knowledge and experience I bring to the table. As I said up front, I'm neither a doctor nor a sports scientist, but I have spent the better part of 16 years in the athletic footwear industry working to create products that improve the lives of athletes. And 6 years before that, with Kicksology.net and Soul Collector, working to connect athletes to the products that best serve their needs. And now, as a person over 50 who's rediscovered the joys of running, and I'll share a video soon that explains that journey of rediscovery, I'm focusing all the things I've learned and all of my industry experience toward the mission of inspiring more people over 50 to become runners over 50. Because the benefits of running for older adults are profound. As I mentioned in the intro, I'm going to work to inspire those of you who've been on the fence about running to jump off of it and hit the road. And for those who are already running, I'm going to deliver information and product insights geared toward helping you as a runner over 50 stay healthy and motivated. I don't have anything against young people, but there are already a gazillion brands, channels, and other resources clamoring for the attention of young runners. For us folks over 50, not so much. And yet we do have distinct needs, which I get to in the video where I bust the biggest myth for runners over 50. All right, so that's what we're all about. If this has been helpful, I hope you'll give it a like and share it with a friend. Liking and sharing will let YouTube know that there is an audience of, let's say mature folks out there who are hungry for content like this. And if you want to see more from us, please do subscribe, or better yet, join our community of like-minded people over 50 who are becoming runners over 50 over on Patreon. I've included a link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and happy running.